Hey, welcome to the show. It's Wednesday, which means it's time for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit. My name is Mike. This is the Leadership Toolkit podcast, your definitive leadership podcast for growth and wisdom, because I have an opportunity to interview amazing people from all over the globe, from all different verticals of business. Today is certainly no different. Today, I have got the amazing and esteemed Steven Gaffney. He is an expert in change management, honest communication, high performing teams. He's worked with Fortune 500 companies like Amazon, Marriott, Allstate Insurance, and the U.S. government and military. And I'm excited to bring to you today Mr. Steven Gaffney. Steven, welcome to the show today, man.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, if you would take just a couple of minutes and give us the 3 minute, 5 minute elevator pitch on who you are, what's your background, how did you get started in business, how did you end up where you are now, and then let's dive into some colorful conversation, hopefully, so that we can help people that are on this leadership path learn and grow.
Well, let me just start off with what I do and what my company does. We
Yes.
make teams great, and we primarily work with leadership teams, and just making them either if they're having a lot of problems, we make them a lot better. And very often we're pulled into teams that are doing really well, but they want to be even better because really, if you think about it, we should never be satisfied, and that's one of the characteristics of what makes teams great is ones that are never satisfied because they're always trying to strive. So that's what my company does. What a little bit of background about myself is I was agent for photographers, film and radio commercial directors many years ago, around 30 years ago. And I started to do seminars for photographers, and then it led to creative people. And then a graphic designer went home and talked about what she learned to her husband who worked for IBM. And that's how I made that kind of crossover into the big corporate world. And when you think about it, and you know as well as I, if you can stand up in front of people and you help people and they produce results, you'll get rehired. So I made a name for myself, and then I created a formula on how to have difficult conversations that work to save people's marriage and work situations and all kinds of stuff. So I've been very fortunate over the years.
Oh, that's fantastic. I did throw up here just so everybody sees on the screen as well. Again, thank you for spending time with me today. Sorry, I was sitting here taking notes. I told you you'll see the top of my head. Uh, for anybody that is tuning in, I always encourage people to take notes because so often someone will say something that's just really excellent and profound and like, oh man, you got to go back and revisit it. I would encourage you, and especially if you're listening to the audio podcast, check out justbehonest.com, and it's spelled just normal JustBehonest.com. And that'll send you to Steven's website. He's an author. You have all kinds of excellent information there. So one thing I want to hang on here for a second. Let's dive into it a little bit. I love the statement you said, we make good teams even better, or something along those lines. And I will repeat my guests often to make sure I'm getting the download properly. But you made the statement that people should never be satisfied.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about never being satisfied, how do you define that? Like, first off, if I'm someone in a leadership role, how can I tell if I'm starting to feel satisfied or complacent? Because a lot of times we're so much in the thick of that business battle, so to speak, that I may not realize it. So when you get pulled in somewhere, um, how do you survey that? What are the first couple or three things that you might look at, Stephen? And how do you approach somebody to help them, start to step forward if they're in that place?
Well, we've identified there's actually 5 characteristics of what I call a consistently high achieving team. And we can talk about why I'm saying
Yeah.
consistently high achieving and not high performing, because I think high performing is old hat and it's not really where people need to go. I don't think they need to create high performing teams. It's
What's the
consistent.
difference?
Well, so I'll get right to it then. There's a difference between performing and achieving, and it's significant. The word performing can be confused with hard work versus
Okay.
achieving. It's all about producing results. And we are paid in the workplace, at least. And really, when you look at your life, it's about achieving results. And people say, well, should you be hung up on results? Absolutely, because that's, whether it's stockholders or stakeholders or people around us, we get paid to produce results. And so, I get paid to produce results, right? Working with a leadership team. It can't be like, well, at the end, that was really nice. And, we had really great conversations. No, what results are we producing? So why is that so important? And how can you immediately use that distinction of performing and achieving? And that I'll share with you an example. A client of mine right now has, after I did work with their leadership team, is now looking through their entire bureaucracy and saying, are we performing? Are we achieving? And when you think about it, as a leader, sometimes you might say to somebody, look, can you do this for me? Or we need to change gears. And they'll say, well, what do you want me to do? Sometimes the response comes back, what do you want me to do? I'm working really hard. And of course, the response back is, I'm not questioning your work ethic. What I'm questioning is whether we're producing the results that we are the best use of our resources. So there's a really important distinction. It's not just like switching out of work, performing versus achieving. The other thing is doing it consistently, because we've all been on teams in life that are successful and they might achieve a great goal, but it's not about being one and done. It's about consistency. So consistently high achieving teams, which so happens the acronym is CHAT. That was developed before Chat GPT, right, and all this other stuff. But anyway, consistently high achieving teams is all where it's at. And so just so people don't think, oh, is he trying to sell me something? The answer is no. I mean, you can contact our website at justbehonest.com. We'll send you a document that goes through the 5 characteristics of a consistently high achieving team and what a tool you can use with your team right now to open up that dialogue and challenge what needs to happen to be successful, consistently successful.
I like the distinction. First off, and I love that because for a couple of reasons. One of my early shows, I had a good friend of mine on, and at the onset, I would often ask people when we were getting into a conversation like, hey, what are the 5 characteristics of leadership? And if you ask 100 people that, you're going to get about 450 different answers. You'll have a few that coincide. Yeah. But he was one of the first people, a good friend of mine, and I love the direction you're going with this, Steven, that when he was going through the hey, here's these characteristics of leadership, his 5th one, he said, you have to have results. People can't talk about what they've done. He says that is a characteristic of somebody that's a good leader, is they got to produce. And as you're talking about this high performing versus high achieving, and that achieving getting results, it also takes me back to another story. Being in sales, I was in sales for many years, direct sales, in automotive sales. And I remember we had one guy that just had, such a good work ethic. Like he could always be found doing something. And I got promoted into management, and this guy was still he was always pushing and working and work ethic. But the thing is, it wasn't always producing the results that were desired. Like he would be the first guy out in front sweeping up cigarette butts in the dustpan, right? And I remember our GM at the time coming to me and saying, hey man, he goes, that's fine. He has a good work ethic, but is sweeping up the cigarette butts out front really producing the results you want from this person that's supposed to be selling and creating income and producing those results? And that's probably the first time in my career that I realized I like the fact that you're bringing it up and you're saying, hey, clearly right now there's a difference between high achieving and high performing.
Well, and you bring up something else too, which is, so what do we, or kind of you can infer, what do we do about that? And to me, it's about great leadership. And so great leaders blame themselves first. Poor leaders blame others first. So immediately, if I was talking to that GM, I would say, okay, why are you creating that culture in which that person is thinking that way? Maybe their work ethic clearly is great. So now all we have to do is turn that work ethic into producing the results. And that's about creating that great culture. So I'm saying that I've learned over the years that too often it's easy to blame others, but great achievers blame themselves first. Let me share with you an example.
Yeah.
So 2009, I got diagnosed with cancer. I'm completely fine now. But at the same time, there was a great recession. And so clearly there's a lot of headwinds, because one of the first things to go in companies is, consulting, training and stuff like that, because you don't have to fire anybody, right?
Right.
At least not initially, right? You can wipe off the consulting side. Now, I would say that it's important, but that's a whole other point. But point is, cancer, recession, could not control that I have cancer, but I could control how I responded to the cancer. Could not control that there was a recession, but I could control on how I responded to the recession. So I decided to, and I learned from someone, whenever you're faced with a problem, assume that others have gone exactly through that situation and they figured out the answer. I mean, if you think about it, Mike, there's over 8 billion people, around 8 billion people who live in this world. Any challenge that we're faced, are we so silly or egotistical to believe that we're faced with a challenge that nobody else has ever encountered and figured out an answer? Odds are great the answers are out there. So back to 2009, I started to ask people, I'm not the first person that went through cancer. I'm not the first person and the only person going through this recession. There has to be companies that are thriving despite those situations. So I did research, I retooled my business. And from those years on, I've had my best years in business. It's not that I'm that smart. It's that I recognize that whenever I'm faced with a problem, I'm going to blame or put myself in control, whatever. Some people don't like words like blame or, and all kinds of stuff. They get hung up. But the point being is I want to look at what I can do because the only person I can control is myself.
I absolutely love that statement too. I remember years ago writing a blog called Running Your Life on Double A's, and it was all about actions and attitude. Like those are the two things that you have complete control over, right? I have control over my actions. I have control over my attitude. A couple of the things that I'm hearing you, and I always jot this down so that I can break it down into steps for people. And that's just how my brain works. As I'm listening to you speak, one, I'm really glad that you are good, right? I mean, that leads us to this conversation. Fast forward 15 years later. The thing it's, I think, really easy for people, whether you're in leadership, whether you're somebody that is following a great leader, just humans, it's very easy to fall all over ourselves and say, well, and become the victim, especially when you have a really grim potential outcome like that. I say potential outcome because I think you do have control over it, but I've heard it said, you control the things that you can control, and the things that you can't, you control the response. And so that was what I jotted down here. A couple of things that I picked up on your response, and you could expand on this for me if you want. But I wrote down four steps to this. One is you have to have some humility. You have to be humble enough to know that you don't have all the answers. And I'm reading between the lines as you and I sit and talk of the fact that because it's easy on the outside, we have to have that polished, confident outlook all the time as leaders, as managers, as entrepreneurs, people in business. That people are looking at you. And so I think that's actually really classy, Steven, that you're saying, hey, I had to know that I didn't have all the answers. You have the humility to just be very forthcoming and admit that. Second thing,
before we get to number two, because I want to build on this, because what you said kind of encapsulating, this discussion, I love how you put humility, because it really is important. It's interesting. I've gotten the privilege of working with many levels of different organizations, but the best admirals, generals, CEOs, and people that they are very, there's a big humility. They may come across confident, and there is an argument to be made, of course, to be confident.
Certainly.
They're very, very open to it. But here's why I want to highlight what you said. Sometimes we surround ourselves by people who are going to try to make us feel better, but they don't really serve us. Here's what I mean. Like, we make a mistake and they go, well, Mike or Steve, or, it's okay. Look, those things happen, and it's easy to get ourselves, or, what, that person was a jerk, or they aren't very talented. And it's easy to slip in that blame game. But the problem is that may make us feel better in the moment, but doesn't serve us in the long run. So we have to surround ourselves by people who are not just going to try to make us feel better, but that will challenge us. I don't mean blame us necessarily, but really put the control back to us. And sometimes it's easy to slip into that blame game, and it doesn't serve us.
You're absolutely right. And sometimes we don't even realize that it's the blame game.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's just a quick one-off justification. And I was sharing, like, right before we went live, when I went through my health ordeal in 2021, it was very easy to fall into the trap of, I was like, oh, woe is me, gosh, I got all this stuff going on and this is shut down and I'm not able to do this. And it took one of my best friends to be like, dude, you got to pull your head out. And if what you have is a voice and you enjoy doing that, then start it. And I'm like, and he knew I knew how, but even then I started to justify why. Well, but I don't know. It's been so many years. I don't know if anyone would listen. and so on and so forth. And he's like, it doesn't matter, right? Just do it. And people will show up. And that, again, that leads us to the path to you and I chatting today. So the second thing I wrote down, so, number one was humility. Number two is you asked questions, not just of yourself, but of other people. And that ties in with the humility piece, right? Because you have to be a little bit vulnerable to say, hey, I don't know all the answers on this. But then and these all sort of tie together, but you asked questions, probably Googled it, did some research. I think you said, hey, I'm not the only person that's ever had this happen. The third thing that I wrote down was you're deliberate with the approach. And so I think that's powerful as well. It wasn't just all willy-nilly. Well, gosh, let me just throw everything against the wall and hope that it sticks. Though that may have been the start, right? But you sort of, from what I heard you say, you sort of distilled it down. You said, hey, I asked these questions, then I continue to go after it. And then the last one, and every leader can appreciate this, and I imagine you will as too. It's one thing to do the research and say, oh, hey, I've got all these answers. It's an entirely other thing to actually take the action, even if it's imperfect action, because man, I can't even imagine as you're going through that diagnosis recession, or what did they call it? They didn't want to call it a recession at the time. It was like an economic downswing or whatever the hell, right?
People put different terminology. In organizations, we're right sizing. Why don't you just say it? It's a layoff. I mean, people want to be told the truth. Anyway, please continue.
So as you went through those things, is like, it's one thing to learn something. It's one thing to know something. It's one thing to ask a question. But if you ask the question, what's on the other side of it? What is the action that you're taking? What are you doing to control that response, right? So I'm curious as we go through, some of these things. And if you're walking into, again, you have quite an impressive background where you're going into Amazon and lots of these other Fortune 500 companies. Do you use that same approach, or what, do you just do that innately, Steven, that you're like, oh man, this is how I operate. And so it passes through. Do you have another approach when it comes to specifically creating culture? Because you brought that up a couple of times. You said, hey, it's a leadership culture, or when we were talking about my former GM, that it's like, hey, that's the culture they've created, that work, even if that's not the result that you wanted. So when you're going in, do you take that same process? Hopefully I'm being clear on my question. Do you take that same process with you? Do you take and assess the culture? How do you determine that when you're looking at a new organization?
Well, I think what you're bringing up, the key word is process. We have to break down and put into process or procedures, ways to look at stuff. And I think a lot of times somebody might say, well, I've got this figured out, but if you're kind of winging it, they work for you, but not probably working for other people. But it's also not working for us, because if we don't distill exactly what we did to be successful, we can't do it on demand when we need to. And so a lot of people get into trouble and they're like, wait a minute, I don't know how to get myself out of it. I've done this before, but I don't, and they haven't really distilled the steps. So what have we come up with? What's my company come up with? Mm-hmm. Not only the 5 characteristics of a consistently high achieving team, but the exact way to have what I call a powerful culture, which we can talk about. Then there's 12 essential elements of a consistently high achieving team. So absolutely, we assess the organization and assess the team by these various process procedures, or you could say essential elements. So we could talk about culture, we could talk about essential elements, wherever you want to go, but it is key to look at exactly what we need to be doing. So what's the key thing that I do with an organization is not assume that I know, assume that I don't know. I ask a ton of questions, just like you do. And something else I find interesting about questions is I love asking questions because I'm bored with myself. I don't know about you, but I know what I'm thinking. I don't need to tell it's helpful, we're hired to share our knowledge, but when I go into an event or something, I ask tons of questions because I want to learn. I want to think through stuff. So I love asking questions.
No, I absolutely, that again, when you and I were chatting beforehand, this is one of the reasons that I started the show. Is it's like, well, and I think probably the reason I ask so many questions that sometimes even seemingly are answered is to make sure that I've got the right information. Like, hey, what is it that you're trying to convey to me? Am I getting it? And I know that if I'm learning something, I feel like then my audience has the opportunity to learn something. And I do. I think there's so much power in questions. And I love what you just stated, and I think every leader should be asking this. Maybe you didn't say this directly, but again, it's what I wrote down. You said, well, what do we need to be doing to achieve the thing? Like that was one of the lead-in questions, or similar to that. And I think when you get into a leadership role, we so often will flip that. We lose it, right? We start off there, especially if I'm somebody moving into a leadership role, or I'm moving into a new entrepreneurial venture, and I say, okay, well, what is it that we need to be doing, or who do we need to be serving? And then over time, do you see that that question gets either blurred, or people get numb to it because then they're in doing the thing instead of continuing to ask that question? Or how do you see that evolve over time?
I mean, the question of about asking, are we going in the right direction? Is
Yeah.
all,
Are we going in the right direction, or what do we, like, what do we need to be doing right now?
so. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just saying, when we're in that situation, and I'm using some of my own experiences as I think through business, and I think of the question, okay, well, what do we need to be doing right now? What do we need to be doing to achieve this thing? What's the direction? Do you find that leaders end up in the thick of it so that they start, I guess, for lack of a better term, I don't know how to frame this, forgetting to ask those basic questions because they're so busy working in the business that they forget to work on the business and continue asking solid questions like that, I guess, is where I'm going with that.
Well, there's a lot to unpack with this. Three things I'd like to share about this.
Sure.
First of all, are we clear on our North Star? So one of the essential elements of a consistently high achieving team or consistently high achieving organization is to
Mm-hmm.
know your North Star. But there are three elements to this North Star. What's our purpose? Not only just, and when I say purpose, it's not just why we exist, but why with the impact. There's a lot about why, but when you think about it, it's why with impact. Here's the difference. We could say, well, why we exist because we want to be the best, leadership company in the world. Okay, but why with impact is we want to be the best leadership in the company in the world, so that we are teaching others so they have great lives and are very happy and continually successful. The impact is the key, and that's really what draws people. Otherwise, why is very internal, and I don't know
Sure.
that it speaks that. But the second thing on the goals is unifying goals, right? Instead of individual goals or department goals, those are fine, but unifying goals. And then what's the strategies? It's simple enough. I can't tell you how many times companies will develop these strategies that nobody uses. They hire the consultant, and the consultant comes in and it was really great. Got all this elaborate strategy, and nobody even uses it. I can give you an easy example, or an easy test. Ask people, what's the strategy of this company, or the strategy of this team, or the strategy of this department? And if people say, well, I know we covered that. I have it somewhere. Can you give me some time? It's a waste, because a strategy is a roadmap, and people are meant to be using the roadmap. If they're not using the roadmap, it's a useless strategy. So your North Star is really key. Proactive honesty, which we can talk about, is really critical. Surrounding ourselves by people who tell the truth. And I could share with you a really good story about that. And then appreciating people along the way. Presume best intent and appreciate. That's a really third good element that really makes this whole thing go. There's other things, but those three things I want to highlight.
Sure. So I'm hearing three things: North Star, defining the North Star, using proactive honesty, and just showing appreciation. Within that North Star piece, when you just described, you said, hey, there's 3 points you got to focus on: the purpose, and what's the why with impact. You said we need to have unifying goals. And then you said, hey, you got to be clear on the strategy. And I want to dive in on the strategy piece for a second, because I've been with a company in the past that our strategy outline, and this is no exaggeration, our strategy outline was 12 pages, and it was like there was everything. So one, so when you're saying, hey, I gotta go find it, let me go find the thing, what's the strategy of the company? Like, literally, there's no way to quickly define it. And over time that was realized, and they developed it down to about I think the company strategy was like, 10 points, and then you had some departmentals over that. So we could fit it all on a page or less. I'm curious. I want to know, first off, how do you define strategy?
To me, it's a roadmap. It's how do we get to the goals? I mean, that's really simply put.
Okay.
And let me just say something about the length. Somebody might say, well, aren't there industries where you would want to have an extensive strategy? And I think I want to make sure that people understand the difference of what we're talking about
Sure.
versus what others might be thinking. This is a roadmap that they can take a quick glance and know what to be doing. There might be many pages that has details to kind of flush out depending on the department. I work a lot in the nuclear industry, and I work with the military, and I worked in the hospitality industry, the gold mining
Sure.
industry. And I can tell you, these things are often, there's elaborate plans, but
Sure.
the overall strategy should be simple enough to see, okay, we're basically going in the right direction and we're following the right path, or we're off and we need to recalibrate. That's what we're talking about. And to prove the point, I developed a formula years ago called the 2 hour and 18-minute strategy. And it can take any issue and convert it into a plan with accountability that's good enough to move out on in 2 hours and 18 minutes. It's a timed approach. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because at least I want people to be thinking it doesn't have to take a long time. Whether they're going to use our formula or somebody's formula, the bottom line is make sure the strategy is simple enough so people will use it.
I absolutely love that. And I think one of the things that we got to remember, and I don't remember who said this to me, but man, it came right to the forefront of my brain when you're talking about this. Strategy being the roadmap. Strategy is just the what. Like, what do we want? That's our strategy. What do we want? Here's our roadmap. The tactics, if you're talking military terms, strategy and tactics, the tactics are the how. The tactics are the how do we get to the results. It's the more nitty gritty. And so when you look at it, and you and I are probably of similar generation. Like you remember the atlases, the big atlas or large atlas maps. I think was what
Oh
they would
yeah.
call them, that you would have in the car, right? So maybe that's your overarching company strategy. But then departmentally inside of it, you got a map of Colorado or Oklahoma. You can turn to that page and know that you're headed the right direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Um, Real
And
quick before. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
you're going to say it real quick.
No, I was just going to say before we get to, I get into this and I obviously flash stuff up on the screen, but for anybody that is listening to the podcast specifically, I want to make sure and spell this out. So while I'm putting this on the screen, if you want to connect with Steven on LinkedIn, you can look for Steven Gaffney Company. That's STEVENGAFFNEY company. So that's linkedin.com/n/Steven Gaffney Company. You can certainly check out his website at stevengaffney.com, STEVENGAFFNEY.com. Or we were saying, for the sake of anybody listening on the road and that sort of stuff, you can go to justbehonest.com, common spelling. You go there and it redirects to Steven's websites and such as well. So make sure, I would encourage you, because a lot of this that he's talking about, he's got intros to some of this on his website. You have links to his books.
Well, yeah, and I just want to say, I want to remind people, if they go to justbehonest.com or any way and they mention your show, we'll send them the 5 characteristics of a consistently high achieving team. It's a tool they can use with their team that will really help them produce results. And the second thing is I want to offer is we have a North Star tool, the North Star PGS tool. We'll give that to them. They just have to obviously cite your show.
Sure.
But if they come on the website and there's ways to contact us, just mention the show. We'll send them both of those things.
So you heard that, just mention the Leadership Toolkit, and they'll send you the North Star. You said it's a GPS tool. That's good.
Well, it's PGS. I'm sorry. Yeah, North Star PGS. It's purpose, goals, and strategy. What we were just talking about. But it's a way strategy. To figure that out very simply.
Got it. So one of the other things, and you brought up 2 other things I really want to make sure we get to today. One is proactive honesty. So explain that to me. And then also, how does that differ? I think I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear the take. How's that differ from reactive honesty? Because reactive honesty to me seems easy.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing this up, because probably of everything we've talked about and we'll talk about, this is the most important thing. So let me kind of get right to it. The biggest problem with all teams and all organizations and all relationships is lack of honest communication. But what I mean by honest communication, it is not what people are saying that's really the problem. It's not the truth or lies direction I'm going. The biggest problem is not what people say, it's what they don't say to each other. It's what they leave out. How often have you thought, if they just told me, I could have done a lot better job? If that's what my customer wanted, if that's what my boss wanted, if that's what my employees wanted, if that's what people wanted, I could have done a lot better job. Or somebody's mad at us, but they don't tell us, they tell other people. And I've had people come up to me after my talks and the sessions and say, that's exactly what happened with the marriage. I got so blindsided. The biggest problem, or even with their teenager and kids, the biggest problem in life is not what people are saying. There's way too much hang up on the tone and body language. That's important. But the most important part to look at is, what are people not saying and how do we get the unsaid said? And that's about proactive honesty.
So I'm curious, because that last statement you said is, how do we get the unsaid said? Because it's not what I'm hearing you say. It's not even what they're not saying. It's what they're not saying to you.
Right.
Because they're saying it to other people. So,
maybe, but yeah, very often.
Or they're just tucking it way down inside. Like, oh, I'm not going to say that because I don't want to hurt feelings. So how do you have any advice, or how do I go about, if I feel like somebody is withholding? How do I get those unsaid things said to me?
So I'm working on the next book on this, but it's a core part of the element of what I do a lot with teams. So there's many strategies. I want to highlight three
Okay.
strategies to get the unsaid said. The first is ask open-ended questions. We don't nearly ask as many questions as it needs to be. I've worked with some leaders who are going in the transmit mode versus in the receiving mode. Great leaders spend more time listening than they do transmitting. So we can talk about the type of questions even more, and I can share with you a great story behind this. The second element is creating emotional safety. And I'm saying emotional safety, not psychological safety. And there's a big difference. Psychological safety, people can think, oh, there's nothing bad that's going to happen. But that's not really what moves people. People are emotional. They're not logical beings necessarily. And so people need to feel safe to bring it up. So that may sound simple, but if you ever had somebody say, listen, you can tell me anything. I love honest feedback. And you give them honest feedback and then they get defensive.
Oh, yeah.
And I bet you there's some people, and I'm not going to ask you to name anybody, but I always say to people, I bet you there are people in your life who have trained and conditioned you to lie to them. They've trained you because of their reaction. You're like, oh, I don't go there.
So you don't want to hurt feelings.
Yeah, or it's going to go on a list and they'll never forget, or it's going to hurt us in some way. So we just don't go there. So it's really important as leaders that we create that emotional safety. And even if we're not reacting poorly, which is good, we have to be protective of others. I've worked with a lot of leaders who, they don't get defensive, but they don't manage their team dynamics. They got people with strong personalities that are reacting to each other, and other people are just shut down. They just want the meeting to end. And so we must create that emotional safety. And the third element is we have to reward honesty. You can't just say, oh, thank you for sharing. You have to do something with it. And that's really critical as well.
So when you say you got to do something with it, rewarding honesty, what does that look like? I mean, is it simply time? Is it listening? Is it high fives? Is it pizza? Is it a pizza party? Not to go there on that.
Well, you got to do something with it. Let me give you an easy example that you see time and time again with companies. They do these employee surveys and they take months and months to get back to the employees what was reported. And even then, they don't always share what they're going to do differently. So what do people do? They say, it's a waste of time. Mike, how many times have you gotten a survey that you don't even answer? I get stuff from companies, after there, and they say, we'd love to hear from you. I'm like, maybe, but is it worth my time to actually give feedback? And then what are they going to do with those results? So we have to do something. So when we ask, people for ideas, when we ask people for feedback, it can't just be thanks for sharing. It's got to be, wow, I really appreciate you sharing that. And as a result, we're going to do this, this, and this. And if they're sharing ideas, maybe we can't take that rough idea whole. We have to massage it or do some things, but then give other people credit. Great leaders make heroes of other people. Poor leaders are hung up on being themselves as a hero. This is about making others a hero. And part of that is really taking other people's ideas that may be rough and massaging it and doing things, but making that idea sparkle and come to life, but then giving that person credit.
No, I love that. I mean, credit, and I know I say that a little tongue in cheek when I'm saying, oh, is it high fives? High fives work if they're in public, and so that you are handing that off and saying, hey, and this is what worked for us. And I think it's super relevant when you're saying, hey, there's this rough cut idea and I got to massage it a little bit. I think it's valuable to go back to the individual that provided you the idea, whether on the same level with you, if they're an employee for you, if they're a level up and they say, hey, I gave you this idea, and you give them. So if they've given you that feedback, what I'm hearing you say is it's important to return that feedback to them and say,
Absolutely.
hey, listen, you said that we should go do, XYZ. And so what we did was we did that to X squared YZ because that's what worked. And I just wanted to thank you for the input. We would have never gotten there if you hadn't mentioned it. And
a quick story about this
yeah,
that ties a lot of these principles
yeah,
together. Some years ago, I was on. I've done a lot of television over
mm-hmm.
over my career. Been interviewed or whatever. And so, but one of my early interviews was on national television, and I came back to the office, and I'll never forget. I thought I did great, Mike. I thought it was like
killed it, right?
And I really did. So I said to my assistant, "How'd I do?" And she said, "Do you really want me to tell you the truth?" Which is never a really great beginning. It's probably not going to be positive.
Right,
anyway,
right.
She basically told me I did an awful job. I repeated myself. I was, I lost the audience, whatever. And I was embarrassed and humiliated. And I was like, this is not the right direction for me. But after I stopped feeling sorry for myself, I took that feedback and I looked at what I did, and I realized not only was she right, of course, and I was appreciative that she said that. It hurt my feelings, but appreciative. But then I retooled the way I do interviews, and I learned a lot. And then I was much better moving forward, significantly better. So why am I sharing that story? A couple of things to unpack there. One is it's important to ask for feedback from others, because we may be thinking one thing, but you learn a lot from others. Second, you have to create that emotional safety, because if you don't create that emotional safety, they're not going to tell you the truth. Oh, you did great when you didn't, or I didn't. And third, you have to do something with that feedback so that person feels rewarded that, wow, I gave that feedback. It might have hurt his feelings, but he did something. He's grown from it. And so that's important, whether we're asking our boss feedback or customer feedback or whatever, do something with that. That's why I share that story.
No, and I think that's excellent. And I think talk about practice what you preach. You had an assistant that was willing to stick her neck out because she had that emotional safety. And it shows that that relationship you had formed with her, she cared enough about you to say, well, this is going to sting, but here it comes. and no, I think that's super powerful. And I agree with you. I've been in positions throughout my career where I'll tell someone, no, hey, give me the feedback. And then when they do, I think it's important to, as leaders, as people, that when we are asking for that feedback, I don't know a better way to put this, but maybe count to 10 before you react. Like we do have to manage our emotional state, because sometimes it's going to bruise our ego. But if you're out there asking people, hey, tell me what I need to know, not what I want to hear.
Yeah.
And if we're genuine with that, then your first reaction, and this is for anybody out there that's listening, because obviously that helped you develop and you've moved, past it, but the story made an impact with you. The very first thing you should be saying to that individual that's willing to give you that honest feedback and honest advice is just thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for acknowledge the fact that, oh, okay, thank you. And I think it's okay too, depending on the relationship. It's okay to go, wow, thank you for telling me that. That stings. Let me process that for a minute. It's okay to have real reaction, right?
Absolutely. So couple of things to kind of build from. First, to be authentic. So there's nothing wrong with saying, wow, I appreciate you sharing that, and it really hurt my feelings. And they're going to go, no, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Say, no, that's okay. I'm glad you told me, and it's getting me thinking about stuff. And then they're going to see you grow from it. and they see us grow from it, and then they feel rewarded. So that's so important. And regarding reaction, the way I view it is all feedback is great feedback. And let me just say that again. All feedback is great feedback, because let's say you get feedback and you're not going to do something with it. Hopefully you are, but no matter what, at least you know where they're coming from. So all feedback is great feedback. And so it's a gift, and it's not easy for people to speak the truth. So often I'll work with somebody and they'll go, well, I can't believe that person didn't tell me. And I'm like, well, did he create that emotional safety? It's not easy to say to your boss or somebody who's even a peer or whatever, the truth, because you're worried about the reaction. Sure. And let's face it, there are people in our lives where we just go, I don't go there because the juice is not worth the squeeze, right? As they say. Right. It's not going to do something. Or how about this? Is we'll have somebody say, yeah, thank you for sharing, but they don't do anything with it. Have you ever had somebody, Mike, ask you for coaching, and, sure. and they go, thank you, that's so helpful. And then you check in with them 2 weeks later and they've done absolutely nothing with it. Then you just say, forget it. It's not worth my time.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up. There's two things I want to make a point on, it's funny you bring it up. My pastor, just recently, he was talking, he says, hey, look, if I'm going to coach with somebody, he says, there has to be, going back to the beginning of our conversation, he says, there have to be results. If you're not going to do the things if you're asking me for advice and I'm going to take the time to help formulate that for you and advise you, and you're not going to do anything on it, we're not going to meet anymore. And it's like, at first that knee-jerk reaction go, well, that's your pastor. They're supposed to be kind and loving and love on you and so forth. Well, yeah, they can do all that. But part of what was loving was they took the time to give you the advice. Yeah. And one thing I'm curious. So when somebody gives you advice, and I have one in my head, I'm not going to say this because I'm curious what your take is. When someone gives you that advice, they say, hey, Steven, you bombed. Mike, man, that show was rough, or those whatever that may be, whatever that looks like. What should I be doing in that position once I've heard they said, hey, you didn't do good? Are there any follow-up questions? Should I do anything else? Do I take it and try and solve it on my own? What's your reaction after the thank you and okay, that stung? Now what?
I think there's always should be follow-up questions, because rarely is the feedback initially enough to move on. Sometimes it is, but quite often we need to ask for a probing question. So here's an excellent question to ask I found in my life. What would you suggest I do better? Or what would you suggest? So, wow, that show was really rough, or wow, I didn't appreciate it when you did this or whatever. Okay, what's your suggestion? How do I move forward? What would you say for us to move forward? That's an important question in all kinds of ways. Even on forgiveness. Have you ever had somebody who keeps bringing up something that we messed up on? And they're right, we did mess up on it, but they never let it go. A good question to say is, look, I've apologized. I've done whatever I can. What's it going to take for us to move forward? My experience is when you ask somebody, what's it going to take for us to move forward? Quite often that other person hasn't thought through that. They're just hung up on the past or complaining. So it's not that we don't want to hear it. It's like, okay, so now what do we do moving forward? I use this question to facilitate a lot of leadership teams, which are getting stuck on an issue and they're all sharing opinions. And I'll say, okay, I got it. So what would you suggest? How do we move forward? So I'm challenging the team to move from complaint mode into solution mode.
Absolutely. That's a John Maxwell quote, right? As he says, there's a difference between being a problem spotter and a problem solver. And I think that the question framing is perfect. It's once you've processed it and once you've taken that, punch to the gut or the ego, I think I agree with you. I think one of the questions I've used throughout my career is, okay, hey, I appreciate the feedback. If you were in my position, what do you think we could do to move forward? Yeah. And I think that causes pause because, and you said it, people haven't thought through that part. They just know, hey, using the interview as an example. If you looked at the assistant, I imagine you asked something similar to this, where just for the sake of this conversation, you spin it around and say, oh, okay, well, I'm just curious. I appreciate the feedback. What would have made it a more engaging and better interview for you to listen to? And
she was very clear on that.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Okay.
just have to ask
Well,
probing questions because one of the value of creating emotional safety is they kind of get it and they'll share more. I mean,
sure.
and also we can also use things because if somebody says, well, I didn't like this, it's telling you what they did like. So for example, I was repeating myself, I did this or that. So
Yeah.
I was able to piece, well, it's not even piecing together. She was very clear on what I should do moving forward. And I loved it. She moved on to create her own business. She's extremely successful today. And she's got my forever friend. She's just
Sure.
an amazing, amazing human being.
So last thing I want to bring up before we conclude today, because one of the things you brought up when we were talking about, North Star and proactive honesty, and you mentioned the power of appreciation.
Mm.
And we've sort of, we've touched on this a little bit when we're talking about that emotional safety, but how do you frame that? How do you use appreciation overall to help a team grow, to help a business grow? When you made that comment earlier, help flesh that out for me.
So there's a lot of things to say about appreciation, but I want to actually give it in maybe in a direction that maybe most people have not heard of.
Sure.
Appreciating others is a great intentional disruption to a pattern of a relationship that's not going well. What I mean by that is sometimes people are in a negative spiral. And when you start to appreciate others, you feel better, we feel better, and we're making the other person feel better as long as it's authentic and specific and results oriented. We can talk more about that. And this is out of my book I wrote a couple of years ago called Unconditional Power. And I made the argument in the book that when we're in a good mood, we're smarter. So, in fact, if you think about it, well,
Okay.
so then how do we get ourselves in a good mood and how do we get others in a good mood? Mindset really matters. Well, one of the techniques in the book is appreciation, because when we appreciate others, it gets us out of ourselves and thinking about other people, but it's also a gift you can give other people and that'll send it in a different direction. So that's going back to even the feedback. I might say, wow, I really appreciate that you gave me feedback on that interview. Now I see exactly what I need to do moving forward in this area, in this dimension. It'll make a big difference. Or just make somebody's day and just say, wow, I really appreciate how a quick response to that email. It's really made a big difference. Or, wow, thank you for being my friend. And it was great dinner the other night. Look, I don't want to make it sound silly. My point is that we don't appreciate enough. And here's my proof positive. Have you ever heard of an employee ever leave a company because they were appreciated too much? Can't stand it.
Not.
I got to leave. There's just too much appreciation. I don't want to, again, it's the idea that it's just too little in life. People are way too stingy. And I've never heard of somebody getting a divorce because they were appreciated too much. Your Honor, I got to get a divorce. Too much love and appreciation in my marriage.
Yeah.
It's just so, but it's remarkable, Mike, because I'll run into people who are worried about appreciation because they don't want other people to have a big head. And I'm like, well, how's that going for you? Appreciation, as long as it's authentic, right? And it's sincere, it's sincere, makes a big difference in people's life. People are starving to be appreciated. It makes a big difference.
Well, and especially in the like boss employee relationship, leader follower relationship, it allows you to remove the questioning and ambiguity, right? Um, it and I've been in that situation where, and gosh, you're so right, because I'll catch myself even now. I'll be engaging with somebody and I really try hard to stop and go, you know what? I just wanted to tell you, I really appreciate your work ethic. You show up to work on time all the time. It doesn't go unnoticed. And they're like, oh, no kidding. They have, and like you're saying, as long as it's genuine, but that removes the questioning. If you're saying nothing to that individual, then so often, and gosh, this just happened to me recently. Person was saying, hey, I've got a health problem going on in my family. I really need to take care of this, but I really value my job and my position. I want to make sure that's okay. And I'm like, oh my gosh, of course. That showed me like, man, I've screwed up. I haven't shown the value that this individual has, to the point that they're questioning, gosh, if I go take care of the sick family member, are you going to replace me? And I'm like, that's a screw up on my part. And again, even recently, can you repeat? I'm curious, because you said an intentional disruption of the pattern. Repeat, what was that you said at the beginning?
It's appreciation is there are many techniques, but it's one technique to intentionally disrupt a pattern that is essentially not serving the relationship or teamwork. Or I'll say it again. So it's like
Yes.
intentional disruption is intentional disruption is a technique to disrupt a pattern that's not serving a relationship or a team. So what I mean ultimately, and I know I keep saying what I mean, but think about a relationship that's not going in the right direction, or people are being real negative. You could say, what would you suggest? Or another thing is to say, listen, I know we're having some tough times, but let me just pause here and say, we share a lot in common. And I do really appreciate how you take care of the family. I do really appreciate how you work really hard. And I do really appreciate how you are very well intended. And I know when you're doing things for me, it's out of your heart. Again, the point is just appreciate. It's got to be authentic. Now, here's the tricky part. When we're mad at somebody, it's hard to appreciate.
Right. Yeah.
But just remember, you can be angry and love someone. And sometimes, I've coached people in relationships where you could say to somebody, listen, I'm angry at you, but I also want to say, I love you. So I am upset about this situation, but I don't want to overstep. Please do not misinterpret that I love you and I'll do anything for you. So you see what I'm saying is, for some reason, people just have a hard time appreciation. And so it's not about skirting over the tough issues, because you got to have that honest conversation.
Sure.
But it's also just remembering about this. And so let me say a couple other last things about appreciation. The way to make it sound authentic and make sure it lands well is make sure it's specific. Some people go, thanks for sharing. Well, you got to be specific. Thanks for sharing. Out of what you shared with me helps me do this, this, and this. So try to be specific and results oriented. I'm not trying to make it complicated. What I'm saying is add some meat to it. And here's something else that most people haven't even thought of. How often do we appreciate our boss? Now, I'm not saying that for anybody who's worked for me. Hey, now it's about appreciating me. I don't mean it that way. But I've worked with a lot of employees who say, my boss never appreciates me. And my comeback is, well, how often do you appreciate your boss? They go, well, my boss should appreciate me. Well, I'm like, well, how's that working for you? Why don't you disrupt that pattern and sincerely appreciate your boss? And sometimes they'll be, well, I don't want them to think that I'm just, saying that to get a promotion. Then say that. Get the unsaid said. Back to what we talked about earlier. Say, listen, I'm not trying to butter up to you or something, but I really appreciate how you hired me. I appreciate how you have faith in me, and I appreciate how you coach me and have helped me with the results with what I'm trying to do. I really appreciate that, because I also appreciate how much you communicate with me, so I always know where I stand. So make sure it's sincere and specific. So all kinds of dimensions on this.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's so many dimensions, but appreciating up, appreciating across, appreciating in business, appreciating in personal relationships, appreciating your kids' coaches. God, there's so much power in that, man.
And Mike, I just want to say something else. Yeah. It also disrupts a pattern that's not serving us. So when we're down in life, and we all get down, if you think, okay, I'm feeling down, what's something I do appreciate about somebody in my life? When you ask that question, your mind goes to a different place, and you start to scan and think about people in your life, and then send somebody an email, send them a text, and you'll see that your mood actually changes. So you can use that technique to disrupt a pattern that's not serving even ourselves.
Super powerful, man. Thank you. We're coming to that. We're the better part of an hour now. So, if I may, again, just thank you for your time, and thank you for, just being so candid and genuine, Steven. It's been a great conversation today on the Leadership Toolkit. A couple of reminders for everybody and anybody. I'll throw the banners on the screen here. Certainly, again, you can connect with Steven on LinkedIn. It's Steven Gaffney Company. It's StevenGaffney Company. If you're looking for the URL there on LinkedIn. Also, the easy URL, which I'll forward you over, is justbehonest.com. Again, Steven mentioned earlier, if you're interested, just if you reach out to them, they can give you a framework, the North Star tool, or if you have other questions. He talked about elements. You talked about the 5 elements of consistently high achieving teams, 5 characteristics. So just mention the Leadership Toolkit. You can message them over and they can get back to you. Any final thoughts as we're headed out this afternoon, Steven?
So one thought I want to leave people with is focus on getting the unsaid said, ourselves and others. And if you're tripped up and you're like, I need to have a difficult message. Remember to explain the total get the unsaid said. So I'll leave you with this story. I was doing a session and this lady said, sometimes you get the unsaid said and people don't like it. And I said, okay, well, I can understand that. I said, what's going on? She said, well, I told my peer that he's dropping the ball and he didn't like that. And I said to her, well, why did you say that? And she said, well, I said that to him because I care about how the team is working. I want us to produce results. I care about him and I want this all to work out. And I said, did he share all of that? And she paused and said, no. I said, I would contend what's tripping you up is not what you said, it's what you left out. So when I say getting the unsaid said, say the whole package and people can hear it if we really deliver it.
Love it. Absolutely. That perfect close, man. I appreciate that. If you would hang out for just a minute and I'm going to go ahead and close out the show. Okay. Thank you again, Steven. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring us to a close for another amazing episode of the Leadership Toolkit. Do me a favor, just a couple of asks, if you would. Again, it always helps the show grow. If you throw some thumbs up on it, whatever platform you may be watching on, or if you're listening later, please throw some thumbs up on it. Most importantly, if you know somebody that would gain some wisdom from listening to Steven's message today, if you know of somebody that you're like, man, this person needs to hear this because they need to say the unsaid. This person needs to hear this because I want to know that I appreciate them. And so they know that when you're going to them and sharing that it's not contrived. Share this show with them. Take and just click the share button, share the show out, because the goal is, how do you impact that next generation of leaders? How do you impact people that are in your circle so that they have the opportunity to learn and grow? So I appreciate you very much for taking your time and tuning in and joining me today on the Leadership Toolkit. Until we speak next, I'll see you next week, everybody. Stay great. Talk soon.